All right, we're recording. All right, so this week we are getting into the skeletal system and the muscular system. So we'll start off with skeletal, so we can talk about kind of the, the literal backbone that everything is built on. So your skeletal system has a lot of different jobs. So we tend to think of the skeleton as being sort of inert, like it's just almost like rock. It's something that's sturdy that we're built on, but skeletal system is living tissue, and it has a lot of other jobs other than just support and protection. It helps us with our body's movements, right? Because it gives something rigid for the muscles to attach to. It also serves storage function, so it helps to store. It's the source of most of our mineral storage, so storing calcium, storing phosphorus, and also storing some fats. Surprisingly, so in your yellow bone marrow, you store triglycerides. Um, and then probably the most kind of like active thing that it's doing is hematopoiesis, and hematopoiesis is the term for the creation of blood, right? So when we're producing red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, all of those are produced within the skeletal system in the bone marrow. All right. So we got a couple different types of bone. We have compact and spongy. Compact bone is just by the term alone, you can tell it's more compact, right? It's a denser type of bone. And you can see here, the mineral matrix of it is packed really closely together. So that's what provides the strength of your long bones. Kind of the outer surface of all of your bones is going to be compact. And then in the middle of the bones is usually spongy bone. So spongy, you can see it kind of has this sponge-like texture to it, where there's a lot of empty space in between the actual rigid bony structure. And spongy bone is good because it helps to create like a lightness to the bone, less weight, less dense, so that your skeleton's easier to carry around. Right? We don't need all that density all the way through. So we can divide the skeleton into different sections, so the axial and appendicular. So axial skeleton is everything that's down the center axis, so the skull, backbone, rib cage. The appendicular skeleton is going to be the appendages, so arms, legs, and then their associated girdles, so the pectoral girdle and pelvic girdle. All right. And if we kind of dig into what the structures of an individual bone are, we'll use this humerus as an example. So each long bone, like the humerus, is going to have ends that are called epiphyses. So we've got a proximal epiphysis and a distal epiphysis. And then we've also got the diaphysis, which is the long shaft that connects the two epiphyses. And we could see that we've got compact bone that's creating the strength all the way around the edges. And then inside the epiphyses is where we mostly see that spongy bone. So you see the spongy bone here, and then in between the spongy bone is the red bone marrow. Okay. In the diaphysis here in the shaft, we've got this empty cavity. Well, it's not empty, but it is a hollowed out part of the bone that we call the medullary cavity. And in there we would find yellow bone marrow, which again is fat storage. Okay, so there's a better look at that medullary cavity. And you can see it's lined with an inner kind of fibrous lining called the endosteum. So endo meaning within, osteum is bone. And then outside the diaphysis, we have another fibrous lining called the periosteum. So peri meaning outside or around osteum bone. All right. So I'm going to go back to this picture real quick and just point out this line up here. So this is the epiphyseal line. And this is a line that kind of separates the epiphysis from the diaphysis of the bone. And that line is important because in children, that's where bone growth is happening. So that's how the bone gets longer, is those two parts of the bone are not sealed together yet. So here we can see on X-ray a child. So you can see the diaphysis here, and then the epiphysis here, and you can see that there's this separating line, and that's because the bones aren't fused together yet. There's still room for growth there. So when the child is still growing, we call it the epiphyseal growth plate. And then as we mature and finish growing, then that plate sort of seals into a solid line, and then we get no more growth from that spot. All right, yeah, so there you can see the line, and it's usually still visible on X-ray even after the growth plate has sealed. All right, so how do we make bones? So there are actually a couple different ways that ossification happens. So ossification, also called osteogenesis, so genesis being the creation of bone. This is going to happen in utero, right? Obviously, you're building your bones when you're starting to grow as a fetus. And then they're going to continue to grow into adulthood. You usually stop growing around 20, 21 years old. And then other times that we need to build bone is during repair. So if you fracture a bone, you got to rebuild it, or just overall remodeling. So as you grow and change or get stronger or weaker, your skeleton will change with you. It's constantly evolving and changing. Right, so here's what bone growth in utero looks like. So this is a type of osteogenesis called endochondral ossification. So endo meaning within, chondral cartilage. So endochondral means we're starting off with a cartilage model of a bone. And then that cartilage is slowly replaced by mineralized bone, right? So over time, we go from having this little kind of soft cartilage bone looking shape to an actual bone where the cartilage has been replaced by bony tissue. Right, and there we can see that ossification continuing into adulthood as the long bones in particular keep getting longer. All right, so I mentioned long bone. The long bone is just a type of bone, right? So we can categorize our bones based on their shapes. So long bones are just any bones that are longer than they are wide. So the bones of your arms, the bones of your legs, your fingers, those are going to be long bones. We also have flat bones, like the example here is the sternum, but also a lot of the bones of the cranium are flat bones. Short bones, like this one over here. Short bones are these tiny little kind of nuggets of bone. These are found in the wrists and the ankles. Then we have irregular bones. So irregular, the example here is a vertebra. So the vertebrae are irregular, and also a lot of the facial bones are irregular, just meaning they don't fall into one of the other categories. That's the way they're supposed to look. We just call them irregular. And then the last type here is the sesamoid. A sesamoid bone is one that's sort of shaped like a sesame seed. That's where it gets its name. And you have a number of sesamoid bones throughout the body, but most of them are very, very tiny, and they form within joints. And they're so small that we don't give them names. But the one that's big enough that it gets its own name is the patella, or your kneecap. Right, and that's just because it's formed in a joint that's so large, right? The knee is a very large and complex joint. All right.
Can I ask you a question?
Of course.
Just what would the bones in the foot, like the top of the foot, what are those called? What kind of bones are?
Those would be long bones as well. Good question. Yeah, so even though they're small, they're still longer than they are wide.
And then the same in the hand, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. All these ones in the hand. Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So what's bone made of? So if we remember back to talking about different tissue types last week, remember that bone is connective tissue. And connective tissue is going to have a lot of extracellular matrix. Right, so we've got the cells, but then we've got all the stuff outside the cells. And that's usually what characterizes connective tissue, is the actual extracellular matrix. So we've got bone cells, but then we've got a lot of matrix. The matrix in bone is mineralized, meaning it's hardened with minerals, right? So the mineral part of it is going to be primarily calcium phosphate, right? And that's what gives bone its hardness, right? But we also have some organic components here, primarily collagen. So collagen is a protein that we find in a lot of connective tissues. Collagen is what gives bone its tensile strength, right? Without the collagen component, your bones would be very, very brittle, right? But that helps them to kind of withstand strong forces. So the mineral part gives it its hardness, collagen gives it tensile strength, right? And then here's the actual cells, right? So a few different types of bone cells. So osteoblasts are cells that build new bone. So what they're good at is taking calcium and phosphorus from the bloodstream and using it to lay down new bony tissue, new extracellular matrix, right? As they do that, as the osteoblasts build bone, they kind of like wall themselves off. So they surround themselves with bone. And once they've done that, then we call them osteocytes. So an osteocyte, like right here, he's totally surrounded by extracellular matrix. And so now he's just a mature bone cell who's capable of maintaining bone, but not really building new bone. And then the last type is an osteoclast. An osteoclast is one that breaks down bone. So he eats away at the extracellular matrix. You might think, well, why do we need that? And it's because, like I said before, your skeleton is constantly remodeling itself. So we'll eat away at bone in certain places and build up bone in other places in order to kind of um, uh, specialize the skeleton so that it's doing its most efficient work, right? We don't want extra weight where we don't need it, and we want to put the hardness of the bone where it's most necessary. And also, sometimes you just need more calcium in your blood, so you need to eat away at some of that bone to get more of the calcium back into the bloodstream. So you've probably noticed looking at all these pictures, these microscopic views of bone, that it has this organization that looks like these concentric circles, right? And each one of these sort of circular shapes here is called a Haversian system or an osteon, right? So osteon is probably the more modern name for it. So an osteon is the functional unit of bone, meaning like that's the repeating structure that we see over and over again when we're looking at bone here. And notice that each osteon has a central canal, right? And you can see one that's bisected here, so you can see that central canal going up and down. Central canal is where we've got the blood vessels coming through. We've got a nerve that runs through there. We've got a lymphatic vessel that runs through there. That's going to be supplying this bony tissue with its needs, right? It needs oxygen, it needs nutrients, it needs to eliminate wastes and carbon dioxide, because these are all still living cells here. So it's very much living tissue. Let's see. I'll stay on the picture. So around that central canal, then we've got these rings of extracellular matrix. The rings are called lamellae. And when I think of lamellae, I think like when you laminate something, you're adding a layer to it. And that's what's happening here. We've just got these layers of bony tissue that are surrounding the central canal, right? And all the little kind of dark spots here within the lamellae, those are where the osteocytes live. So those are called lacunae, which that word is right here. Lacunae means little lake. So it's a little lake inside the bone where the osteocyte lives. So there's that terminology. Right, so here you can see again, central canal surrounded by lamellae with the little osteocytes living in the lacunae. And there's also these tiny little, they look like cracks in the bone. They're not, but those are canaliculi, which means little canal that connects the bone cells to each other so that they can share nutrients. When we look at spongy bone, It looks a little bit different. So it doesn't have the same exact osteon structure that we looked at with compact bone. So for spongy bone here, we still have lamellae. We just don't have that central canal. And the reason is we don't need it because the trabeculae is already kind of um, interspersed with the bone marrow all surrounding it. So we don't need that separate canal just to access nutrients. So, but we still have lamellae, we still have lacunae with osteocytes and canaliculi extending through those lamellae. All right. And then just a note on the different types of marrow here. So within the epiphyses or the ends of the long bones, that's where we're finding most of our red bone marrow. And red bone marrow is the bone marrow that's responsible for blood formation, so hematopoiesis or formation of blood cells, right? And then again, in the medullary cavity of the diaphysis, that's where we find the yellow bone marrow. All right, let's talk about fractures here. Because fractures are obviously really common, especially working in the healthcare field, you're going to see a lot of fractures. We have different ways of classifying them, mostly based on the actual anatomical appearance of the fracture itself. So we can look at some of these here. So a closed fracture is just any kind of fracture that does not break the skin. So a lot of these terms are going to overlap with one another. So a closed fracture just means both ends of the bone are still within the body. An open fracture is one that does break the skin. So like picture B here, where we've broken a femur and the distal part of that femur has protruded through the skin. Okay. A transverse fracture is something that occurs across the long axis or in the horizontal plane. So again, these can overlap, right? So you can have a closed transverse fracture. So this is closed and transverse. You can have a spiral fracture. So spiral is one that's going to, happen on a sort of like a helical shape. Those types of fractures usually result from a twisting motion, right? So a common in children, if they, are falling out of a chair or something that the limb twists on its way down. Comminuted. So comminuted fractures are one where we've got a bunch of little breaks. So you've got these tiny little pieces of bone. So it's not just one clean break. An impact fracture is one, usually it happens as a result of a fall. So if you fall and you put your hands out in front of you to stop yourself or break your fall, the distal end of the bone pushes into the proximal end. And that force is what generates the impact fracture. A green stick. So green stick fracture is literally like if you go outside and you try to break a stick that's green on the inside, you're going to have a hard time breaking it. It's going to most likely bend instead of break, or maybe just break on one side, but not all the way through. And really common in children because their bones aren't fully mineralized yet. They still have a lot of collagen. The bones are pretty soft. So you see these green stick fractures. And then an oblique fracture is just one that occurs at an angle. Okay, so if it's not a horizontal or transverse fracture, then it's oblique. All right, and then how we repair them. So fracture repair starts with a hematoma, which is what happens when you break a bone. Because remember, bones are highly vascular, right? There is a lot of blood vessels running through your bones. So when you break a bone, you're also going to break blood vessels. And when you break those blood vessels, you're going to bleed. And that blood is going to collect under the surface of the skin and will look like a bump, a hematoma, right? So that brings a lot of white blood cells to the area, right? And white blood cells are going to be responsible for then starting the process of cleaning up. So cleaning up any debris. If it's an open fracture, then cleaning up any pathogens that manage to get in there and start the healing process. So healing process is going to involve building a callus. So callus is going to be really just the formation of cartilage around the two ends of the broken bone, right? So we start off by making cartilage to kind of hold the bone together, and then slowly replace that cartilage with bone, just like when we were talking about the endochondral ossification, right? We're replacing cartilage with bone. So that's our bony callus. And then the last stage is just remodeling that bone and trying to get it as close as we can back to what it originally looked like. If most people who've ever broken a bone will probably say that it's never fully perfect again. There might be a little dent or a little bump in that bone as it's trying to kind of remodel itself back to what it used to be. All right. So just a quick note on calcium, because we mentioned that obviously your bones, the mineralized portion consists of a lot of calcium. So we need calcium, we need to get it from our diet. And in order to absorb it from our diet, we need vitamin D. So this is where your skeletal system kind of ties in with your integumentary system. Remember that the integument can manufacture its own vitamin D when it's exposed to sunlight. So we can get vitamin D from the skin. You can also get it from your diet, right? We have plenty of foods that are fortified with vitamin D, milks and cereals and things, so that we make sure we're hitting our D requirements. And that vitamin D, again, just helps you absorb calcium. You can't absorb it without it. Right. So looking at the two skeletal divisions, so we mentioned that the axial skeleton is the one on the center axis, so skull, backbone, rib cage. Appendicular is the parts of the skeleton associated with the arms and the legs. We're going to have to learn all the bones, so you should know all of the 206 named bones in the body. And we'll start by going through the axial skeleton. Again, bones is a good place for, to make flashcards if you're trying to put these to memory. So we'll start by looking at the skull. So your skull, the bone that is directly beneath your forehead, that's going to be the frontal bone. The frontal bone is sutured. So we've got a joint there. It's a suture joint that joins the frontal to the parietal bone. So parietal bones are kind of on the sides of the top of your head. Again, fused together. So you've got two, one on each side. And then on the back, here at the base of the skull, we've got the occipital bone. And then at either side, right behind the ears, are temporal bones. So, and you can see the ear canal right there. Right, so all of those bones, along with this one underneath, kind of behind the eyeballs and underneath the front of the brain, is called the sphenoid. These create the brain case. So they're all sort of surrounding and protecting the brain. So this is where the brain has protection from the skeletal system. Another one, we should mention in there is the ethmoid bone. So the ethmoid bone, you don't get a great view of it from this picture. You can see a little bit of it here inside the eye orbit, but I'll show you a better picture later. It's again part of the brain case. Here's a little baby skull. In babies, these sutures haven't yet fully sealed. Because as humans we've got really big heads, and those take some time to fully grow into themselves, so we have to leave some space for growth of the brain in children. So we've got the soft spots. So soft spots are just fontanelles, which are joints that haven't fully sealed yet on the skull. All right, so here's the sagittal view through the skull. So we can see frontal bone, parietal, occipital, temporal. And then here we see the sphenoid. So there's a better view of the sphenoid. And we can see how it's kind of holding up the brain just behind the nasal cavity. And then this one over here, this orange one, that kind of creates part of the nasal septum, dividing the nose in half, but also just behind the eyeballs and underneath the front part of the brain. This is the ethmoid bone. So ethmoid, sphenoid. All right, so all of those were the brain case. If we move on to the facial bones, now we're moving down into the face here, and the bones that create the facial structure. So the ones we can see from this angle here, so we've got a couple nasal bones. Those are the ones that my glasses are sitting on here on the bridge of my nose. We've got zygomatics. Those are going to be the cheekbones. You can see they kind of go up around the corner of the eye orbit and then also kind of meeting the temporal bone over here on this zygomatic arch. The maxilla, which is the upper jaw, so there's two of those, but they're fused in the middle. And then mandible, which is the lower jaw here. We take another view, we can see some more, again, nasal bones up here. Right in here, in the inside corners of the eye, are tiny little bones called the lacrimals. Lacrimal bones are where tears are going to drain from the eye into the nose. On the inside of the nasal cavity, we see part of that ethmoid bone that we already looked at, and then also the vomer. So the two of those together create this nasal septum that divides the nose into two halves. Also here we've got the middle nasal concha and inferior nasal concha. So these are tiny little bones, again, inside the nasal cavity. They're covered in mucous membranes, and what they do is basically help, when they're covered in mucus, help warm up the air that you're breathing before it gets to your lungs. I think we mentioned all the bones there. Oh, and here's the last one that you couldn't really see from that view, is the palatine. So palatine, along with the maxilla, form the hard palate or the bony roof of your mouth, right? So most of it's maxilla, but as we move posteriorly, we've got these little palatine bones back there. Right, and then the hyoid bone, I'll go back to show you the picture. Hyoid is right down here. So it's the only bone in the body that does not articulate or form a joint with any other bone. It's just kind of floating there in your neck. Well, it's not floating. It's connected to cartilage, but not to any other bones. The hyoid bone serves as a point of attachment for a lot of your tongue muscles, and your voice box hangs from the hyoid bone. All right, and then the tiniest little bones are within your ear. So inside the middle ear on either side, we've got three tiny bones called the ossicles. Those are specifically the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. And they're responsible for just transmitting vibrations from your eardrum to your inner ear. All right, so that was the skull. And now we'll move into, sorry, I'm listening to my dog snore in the other rooms. I don't know if you can hear it, but I can. We'll move down to the vertebral column. So your vertebrae, thankfully, they don't all have independent names, right? They're mostly just numbered. And you can see, looking from the front, they're in a perfect line. Right, we've got cervical vertebrae that are in the neck. We've got thoracic vertebrae in the chest and lumbar vertebrae in the abdominal region. And then a sacrum and a coccyx at the very bottom. And for the most part, they're just numbered. So cervical vertebrae, we're going to label C1 through C7. Thoracic vertebrae are T1 through T12. And lumbar are going to be L1 through L5. Now, I used to remember this when I was in school, that they go 7, 12, 5. So breakfast at 7, lunch at 12, and dinner at 5 is the way I used to remember it from top to bottom. Right. If we turn the spine and look at it from the side, we can see that it is not straight, right? From the front, it looks straight. From the side, we see these curvatures, and that's really important. These are natural curves of the spine that help create strength. So the cervical spine, C1 through C7, they kind of bend a little bit anteriorly. The thoracic spine curves to the back, and then the lumbar spine curves to the front again, so anterior. And then the sacrum and coccyx have a natural sort of posterior curvature. Right, so those are normal curves of the spine. There are such thing as abnormal spinal curvatures like scoliosis, lordosis, but your spine does have normal curves. Those curves are going to be formed by the individual joints within the spine. Okay, so each vertebrae, each pair of vertebrae is going to be separated by an intervertebral disc. Right? And so that's this little fibrocartilage disc that's separating the vertebral bodies. Because if we look at an individual vertebrae, you can see it's got this really thick part called the vertebral body. That's the part that's bearing all the weight of your spine. And then we've got these sort of like bony projections coming out the other side. So the one that goes straight out the back is the spinous process. So when you kind of feel your spine, what you're feeling are the spinous processes. Right, and then we've got these transverse processes. These are all there for muscles to attach, right? It's got really large, broad back muscles that need a bone to attach to, and that's what all these bony processes are for. All right. So the first two cervical vertebrae, the ones right underneath the skull, have their own names. We call them atlas and axis because they're kind of unique and they have special jobs. Atlas is the first vertebrae, and it's the vertebra that your skull sits on. So the occipital bone of the skull is going to sit directly on the axis, or I'm sorry, on the atlas. And that's how it got its name from the old Greek myth where Atlas carries the world on his shoulders. But in this analogy, your head is the world sitting on the shoulders of this Atlas bone. And the one right below it, C2, is also called the axis. And the axis has this little dens or odontoid process. This is a projection of the bone that kind of sticks through the bone above it and allows for rotation. So this is what allows your head to rotate side to side, which is why it's called axis, because the world rotates on its axis. All right, and here you can see all the cervical vertebrae lined up, so C1 through C7. All right, next 12 vertebrae are the thoracic. So again, just T1 through T12. None of these have special names. What's unique about the thoracic vertebrae is that these all have these little facets on the side or ribs to attach to. So ribs, all 12 pairs of your ribs attach to the 12 thoracic vertebrae, right? You don't have ribs attaching to any other vertebrae. Right, and then the lumbar, again, 5 of them just numbered L1 through L5. These are the largest vertebrae because they're bearing the most weight, right? As we go down the spine, each one of those bones is carrying more and more weight as we go down. So these lumbar vertebrae are carrying the brunt of the weight of the body. Right, and then at the very end of the spine down here, we've got the sacrum and the coccyx. So sacrum is this sort of triangle shaped bone. It's really just 5 sacral vertebrae that have been fused together into one solid bone. And then same thing is true for the coccyx, so a little tailbone down here. Used to be 4 separate vertebrae, but they all fuse in utero to be this one little tiny triangle bone. All right, so I mentioned that the thoracic vertebrae is where the ribs attach. So the ribs, most of them are going to wrap all the way around front and attach to the sternum as well. So they go from the thoracic vertebrae all the way around the front to the sternum, as you can see here in this picture. Right, so they're going to wrap thoracic vertebrae, come all the way around and attach to the sternum in the front. Right. They're actually attaching to the sternum via these costal cartilages, is what they're called, or These are pieces of cartilage that help the ribs have some flexibility because the ribs are constantly moving and we need them to be able to move in order to breathe. Right. So as you take a breath, we need the rib cage to be able to expand with a breath and contract with an exhale. So we need that movement of those cartilages there. All right. So you've got 12 ribs. The first 7 go all the way from the back to the front. And those ones we call true ribs because they connect from back to front. The last 5 pairs we call false ribs because they don't directly connect in front. What they do is, if we look at ribs 8, 9, and 10, for example, what they do is wrap around and then they attach to the rib above them instead of attaching directly to the sternum. So 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 are all false. 11 and 12 are false and floating because they don't attach to anything in the front at all, right? They just float off the back. All right. So that was the axial skeleton. Any questions about the axial skeleton?
No, not so far.
Okay, awesome. So we'll move into appendicular then. So appendicular skeleton is just the appendages, so arms, legs, shoulders, hips. So we'll start with the shoulder joint. And you can see shoulder is going to be comprised of the clavicle here, the scapula, and the humerus. So this is your whole sort of upper arm apparatus. Right, the clavicle is your collarbone, right? So it's going to articulate at one end with the sternum, and then the other end articulates with the scapula, and that's the kind of like you can feel that pointy part on your shoulder. Okay, so where that attaches to the scapula is called the acromion. So the acromion process you can see up here. So the scapula is a really kind of unusual shaped bone. It's got these broad, flat sort of fossas, we call them. So these broad sort of indentations in the bone. Again, muscles are going to attach to this spine. So this is the spine of the scapula, ends in the acromion process. And then we've got the glenoid cavity here. So if we're looking at it from the side, you see this fossa or indentation, and that's where the head of the humerus is going to sit in order to get that shoulder joint. So scapula, clavicle, humerus. So humerus is the bone of the arm. You can see it's got some bony features. Again, we're not going to get into all the detail of the features here, but there's room here for muscles to attach to allow for these bones to move. Right, and if we get down into the forearm has 2 bones, the radius and the ulna. In standard anatomical position, so with your arms out to your sides, palms facing forward, the radius is always going to be lateral and the ulna is always going to be medial. Another way to remember that is that the radius is always on the thumb side and the ulna is always on the pinky side. All right, and here's where the radius and the ulna meet the humerus to form the elbow joint. And you can see the ulna almost sort of just grabs on to the back of the humerus. And that's what that olecranon is what creates the kind of pointy part at the tip of your elbow. All right. Getting into the hand then. So the hand is going to consist of carpals, metacarpals, and phalanges. So these are groups of bones. Your carpals are these 8 little tiny short bones of the wrist. Your metacarpals are 5 long bones of the palm of the hand. And then the phalanges are the long bones of the fingers. Okay. So your phalanges, each of your 4 fingers is going to have 3 phalanges in them. So we've got a proximal, a middle, and a distal phalanx is the singular in each one of your fingers, right? So proximal is the closest, then we've got the middle and the distal is the furthest away. Okay, so that's true for these 4 fingers. Your thumb just has 2, right? So just a proximal and a distal phalanx in the thumb. And then if we're looking at the metacarpals, metacarpals are easy because they're just numbered 1 through 5, right? So first metacarpal is the one that's associated with the thumb. Second metacarpal is associated with the pointer finger. Third one with the middle finger. Fourth with the ring finger, and fifth with the pinky. So they're just numbered 1 through 5. And then it gets complicated. So the carpals, like I said, there are 8 of them. They are all tiny little nuggets of bone that are in your wrist. Each of them is articulated with the other. They have this sort of like slight movements between them that allow you to kind of do this sort of stuff with your wrist, move it around and have that flexibility there. There's I think this mnemonic device might be in your learning maps to help you kind of remember these in order. So I like to think of the carpals as being in 2 rows of 4. At least that works for my memory, to think of there being like a proximal row and then a distal row of carpals. The proximal row, if we go from thumb side to pinky, they go scaphoid, lunate, triquetrum, pisiform. Those are the 4 proximal. And then the distal row, again, thumb to pinky, trapezium, trapezoid, capitate, hamate. Right, and here's a little mnemonic device to help you remember those in order. Right, and I think in my opinion, the wrist bones are the hardest of them. If you got those down, then you're good to go. We'll move down into the pelvic girdle. So pelvic girdle is how the legs attach to the torso. The pelvic girdle itself is going to be made up of 2 os coxa. So this whole bone here together is called the os coxa, but it's separated into 3 different bones. So we've got this large upper kind of wing part of it that is called the ilium. This part down here that's kind of the most inferior and posterior is the ischium. And then towards the anterior is the pubis. All right, and then we can see this big indentation here called the acetabulum, and that's where the femur is going to sit. All right, so if we look at the whole pelvis together, there's 1 os coxa on this side, 1 os coxa on that side, and then the sacrum is fused in between the 2. Right, so each ilium has a joint with the sacrum. It's called the iliosacral joint. And then anteriorly, each pubic bone meets at this pubic symphysis. Pubic symphysis in the front, and then down here at the bottom, these are the ischia. So the ischia, those are the bones that you're sitting on right now. So if you can feel your sit bones, what you're feeling are these little ischial tuberosities. All right, and then over here on either side, you can see in the acetabulum. Acetabulum is where the head of the femur rests. So your femur, which is the bone of the thigh, is the longest and strongest bone in the body. It's carrying a lot of weight, right? So as we get down to lower parts of the body, those are bearing more weight than higher up. The femur kind of rests at an angle so that we can walk on 2 legs. It's important that there be a little bit of an angle there in order to also to help accommodate childbirth. So we've got these femoral angles. The head of the femur sits in that acetabulum of the os coxa, and then distally at the bottom of the femur, it will articulate with the tibia. So you can see that distal end of the femur here, and then the tibia down here. And then where those 2 come together, that's the knee joint. And the patella is within that joint. So it sits within the tendon that's coming down across the thigh and attaching to the tibia. All right. So in the leg, then you've got 2 bones, the tibia and the fibula. The tibia is always medial. The fibula is lateral. right? So off to the side. The tibia is the weight-bearing bone of the leg, right? So all the weight that's channeled down through the femur goes through the tibia and into the foot. The fibula is really skinny and it does not bear weight, right? It's there for muscle attachment and to encourage rotation of the leg, but it doesn't bear any weight. Both the tibia and the fibula then are they form this sort of arch at the bottom. They're going to articulate with a bone called the talus of the foot. So if we look at your foot, again, the foot and the hand are going to be really similar. So in the hand, we had carpals, metacarpals, phalanges. In the foot, we've got tarsals, metatarsals, phalanges. So really similar structure. In this case, instead of having 8 carpals, we're going to have 7 tarsals. So the first of the 7 tarsals is going to be that talus that articulates with the tibia and the fibula. Excuse me. And then the bone of the heel is the calcaneus. So that's a really strong, tough rock of a bone that bears a lot of weight. And then we've got these arches, right? So the way that the foot bones are put together creates arches that go longitudinally along the length of the foot, but also go laterally across the sort of horizontal axis of the foot. And those arches are what helps the foot bear so much weight, right? So arches, if you know anything about architecture, are really, really strong structures that are able to bear a lot of weight. And they perform that function here in the foot, right? Help to carry the weight of the body. All right, let's look at a picture of the foot here so we can see all of these tarsals, right? So the tarsals are, again, talus, articulates to create the ankle joint, calcaneus, which is the heel bone. Right in front of the talus is a bone called the navicular. Right, so navicular right there, kind of on the medial aspect of the foot. Next to that is the cuboid, so here on the lateral aspect. And then the last 3 here are the cuneiforms, and they're just numbered. Cuneiform 1, 2, and 3. So there's 3 cuneiforms: navicular, cuboid, talus, calcaneus. Those are your tarsals. The metatarsals, just like in the hand, they're just numbered. So just 1 through 5. So metatarsal 1 is associated with the big toe, and then on through 5 is associated with the pinky toe. And then for the toes, exactly the same as the fingers. We've got 3 phalanges, proximal, middle, and distal phalanx for each of the 4 toes. And then for the great toe, just a proximal and distal phalanx. Another look at those arches. Again, helping to carry the weight. If those arches fall, then you're considered to be flat-footed. And that can be a really, really painful condition because you don't have the arch giving the support that it needs to carry the weight of the body. All right, so we covered all the bones. That's 206 if you're counting. Again, there's a lot. There are more bones than that. They're really tiny, and most of them don't have their own specific names. So any questions about the bones?
No, not really. I'm gonna go back over. That was a lot of information, so I'm just gonna go back over. If I do, I'll send you a message.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, just let me know. And for anyone watching at home, again, just reach out, email me if you've got any questions. I know this is a lot of information. We still have a little bit of joints to talk about before we get into the muscular system, which is also covered this week. So these joint classifications here. So we've got a lot of joints in the body. So joints are just where bones come together. We can classify them based on their structure, so how they look. We can also classify them based on their function, so how they work, right? So structural classifications of joints, they fall into one of these 3 categories. They're either going to be a fibrous joint, so held together with dense fibrous connective tissue. It could be a cartilaginous joint, where we'll have bone, cartilage, bone, or they could be a synovial joint. A synovial joint is one that's got a joint capsule surrounding it and usually has a lot of movement associated with it. Okay, so those are our structural categories. We can also look at the way that joints function, but a lot of times these categories overlap. So a synarthrosis means no movement at that joint. So you do have some joints where bones come together that are not supposed to move. An amphiarthrosis is a joint that moves a little bit, and then a diarthrosis is a freely movable joint, usually what you think of when you think of a joint. Okay, so here's an example of a fibrous joint. So all those sutures in your skull hold the skull together. We've got bone, and then we've got fibrous connective tissue, and then another bone, right? And that's holding these two bones together very tightly so that there is no movement. So this fibrous joint is also a synarthrosis because there's no movement there. A gomphosis, that's what this one is here. This is your tooth, right? So the tooth that sits in the jaw, that's a joint that we do not want to have any movement at, right? So we've got a ligament, so dense fibrous connective tissue holding the tooth to the jaw. Similar thing is true over here. So holding the tibia and the fibula together, we've got this fibrous connective tissue. This one does have a little bit of movement to it. So your tibia and fibula can rotate around each other a little bit, just like your radius and your ulna can. So you can feel that movement if you're rotating the arm. A little bit of movement, but that dense fibrous connective tissue making it a fibrous joint. All right. And then cartilaginous joints. So these are bone, cartilage, bone. Again, most of them don't have a lot of movement. So all of the joints that are your epiphyseal lines, those are cartilaginous joints because there's still that kind of line of cartilage in there. The pubic symphysis, where the two pubic bones come together, that is a cartilaginous joint, right? Because it's got a big chunk of fibrocartilage holding the two bones together. That one does have a little bit of movement, usually just during childbirth. Shouldn't really be flexible any other time. All right, and then the last category, structural category of joints is the synovial joints. So synovial joints are also diarthroses, meaning they create free movement. And a synovial joint is just one that's got this whole capsule surrounding the joint, right? So much more complex than a cartilaginous joint or a fibrous joint, because we've got this synovial capsule surrounding where the two bones come together. And the synovial capsule has a membrane on the inside that's generating fluid, so synovial fluid that bathes the entire joint, right? And that is going to allow those bones to kind of slide past each other without creating too much friction, right? So that there's no pain when those bones rub against each other. All right, so inside the synovial joint, notice that the ends of each long bone here have articular cartilage on them. So this is just a finger joint, so between two phalanges. But there's articular cartilage on either side so that those bones are not directly touching each other. And then the whole thing is bathed in this lubricating synovial fluid. So that finger joint is relatively simple for a diarthrosis. You have much larger, more complex joints in the body, like this shoulder joint. You can see, in addition to all of the ligaments that are holding the bones together, we also have these bursa in here. So bursa are basically like little water pillows, little fluid-filled sacs that are inside the joint to help create cushion. And then we're going to get into the types of movements that synovial joints are capable of. Okay, so synovial joints can move in a lot of different ways. This first one here is an example of a hinge joint. So a hinge joint, just like a hinge on a door, it really just has that one angle of movement. So your elbow is a hinge joint where the ulna hinges around the humerus. We also have a pivot joint at the elbow. A pivot is one where you get rotational movement, and that's, you can see here also at the elbow, the radius rolls around the ulna. So this round head of the radius is able to sort of roll around the ulna and get this sort of movement, the rotational movement of the forearm. All right, and then a saddle joint. So a saddle joint is one that you can have movement in really three different axes here. So saddle joint, like the one that connects the thumb to the rest of the hand, allows you to kind of move the thumb across like this, but also out to the side, in and out, back and forth. So that's a saddle joint. Okay. And then a condyloid joint, so like that where the wrist attaches to the forearm, and really just movement in two directions. So I can move the wrist back and forth, and I can move it side to side, right, and do kind of like a princess wave, right? That's the condyloid movement of that joint. All right, and then ball and socket. So a ball and socket joint is your most highly movable joints in the body. So these are the shoulder and the hip. So the shoulder and the hip are both ball and socket joints. And you can see why it's called that, right? We've got a ball that fits into a socket there. The hip joint is not as flexible as the shoulder because the shoulder has a more shallow socket, which allows for more movement. And then planar joints. These are really just when two kind of short bones slide past each other a little bit. So this happens in the wrist and in the ankle or the foot, where the little short bones can slide past each other a little bit, so you get slight movements there. All right. So all of those different movements, it is going to be important to know those. So they'll pop up on quizzes. So gliding movements, like we just talked about with the condyloid motion of the wrist. We're going to have some terminology associated with the different types of angular movements that your joints can make. So if we're doing a movement where the angle of a joint gets smaller, that's going to be flexion. So if I bend my elbow and I bring the forearm towards the upper arm, that's flexion of that joint. I've made the angle smaller. Extension is making it longer or opening that angle, right? So flexion closes the angle, extension opens the angle. Abduction is to take away. When you abduct someone, you take them away. So abduction of the arm is pulling it away from the midline. Same thing is true of abduction of the leg, would be sticking the leg out to the side. Adduction, or add back in, that's moving it back towards the midline. So you're adding it back to the body. And then circumduction is just a big circular movement. So I can circumduct my arm by bringing it all the way around. So there's some pictures instead of me just making those movements. There's the abduction and adduction. Circumduction, you can do the arm or the leg. Rotation is similar to circumduction, except instead of making that big movement, you're just rotating it on an axis. You can rotate the head side to side, you can rotate the arm, you can rotate the leg, but it's not as big of a movement as circumduction. And then special movements of the foot here. So inversion of the foot is when you point the soles of the feet inward towards the midline. Eversion is pointing the soles of the feet outward laterally. Dorsiflexion is angling the foot upward, so toes are pointing up. And plantar flexion is pointing the toes down. All right, and then special movements of the arm, here or the hand. So supination is moving the forearm so the palm is turned upwards. Pronation is turning it so it's downwards. And then opposition is a special thing that your thumb can do, right? It opposes the other digits, so you're bringing the thumb across. All right, we went through all the special movements. Questions about skeletal system?
No.
Okay.
Mm-mm.
So we'll move into muscular. I'll try to keep it quick because I know I'm going a little long here. So muscular system, um, this is a very different tissue than the skeletal system. So muscular involves excitable cells. So these are cells that can respond to an electrical current. And muscle cells, in response to an electrical current, will contract. They will shorten. And when those cells shorten, they're going to pull on the bones that they're attached to and bring those bones closer together. So they are contractible cells. They're also extensible, meaning that I can contract this muscle, but I can also stretch it out. And it's elastic, meaning that after I've stretched it out, it can go back to its regular shape. So really special tissue. Main functions of your muscular system, the primary function is to create motion, right? So muscles are going to help you move your skeleton around in space, move the body. They're also going to help move things inside the body. So moving blood through the cardiovascular system, moving food through the gut, right? All of that movement is generated by muscles within the body, right? And a byproduct of all of that movement is heat, right? Because muscles have to be so metabolically active to generate that kind of movement that they put off a lot of heat as a byproduct. So your muscular system is important in maintaining homeostasis because it helps you maintain your body heat. All right, so we've got three different sort of categories of muscle, skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. Your skeletal muscles are the ones that are attached to the skeleton and help the skeleton move around. These are also voluntary, meaning these are the ones that I am under conscious control of, right? I can choose to use my muscles to lift my cup of coffee. I can choose to use my muscles to talk, to hold my posture, to sit in this chair, right? All of that's under conscious control. The cardiac and smooth muscles are both considered involuntary. Okay, so cardiac are the ones associated with the heart. Smooth muscles you find within the body and lining your gut or lining your blood vessels. And you do not have conscious control over those muscles. They also look slightly different. So if we look at a skeletal muscle, it's what we call striated. So striated meaning it has a striped appearance. Skeletal muscle cells also are really, really long. So they're these so to the point where we don't even call them cells, we call them fibers because they're so very long. So skeletal muscle fibers are these long, multinucleate, so lots of nuclei, striated cells. Cardiac muscle cells are also striated, so we can still see the stripes there, but they're much shorter and they tend to be branched. So they have these little branches coming off of them, usually just one nucleus in the middle. And then visceral or smooth muscle, no striations. That's why it's called smooth. They do have just one single nucleus, and they've got this sort of like tapered shape to them. All right, so if we're looking at pictures like this, microscopic images, this top one up here is going to be skeletal muscle. And you can tell because we've got these really long fibers. We can see the stripes or the striations. And then we also see the darker staining nuclei are kind of all pushed off to the side. This one in the middle, this is smooth muscle. And you can tell that because it literally looks smooth, right? Compared to the other one, we don't see the striations. We just see these kind of long, smooth cells that are just have that one central nucleus to them. And then the bottom picture here is cardiac. We can tell it's cardiac muscle because, again, we've got striations, but we've got this branched pattern, and we've got a single central nucleus in each cell. All right. So the way that your muscles, we'll kind of focus on skeletal muscle because it's the easiest one to sort of study. The way that your muscles are packaged, is within a lot of different layers of connective tissue. So the muscle tissue and the connective tissue, you can almost think of it like an onion. We've got a muscle cell, it's going to have a connective tissue sheet on top of it. And then we bundle a bunch of muscle cells together, and that's got another connective tissue sheet on top of it. And then we bundle a bunch of bundles together, and that's got a connective tissue sheet. So there's these kind of like layers all within each other. Let me show you a picture of it. So the layers are going to be referred to as these mesia. So epimesium, paramesium. So if we look at, that's the picture I want. So here's an individual muscle fiber right here, and you can see it's kind of going this long lengthwise pattern. Each muscle fiber is surrounded by endomesium. So endo meaning within with the muscle, mesium, muscle. So this endomesium is the sheet of connective tissue that covers the individual muscle fiber. Right? Then we can have a bunch of muscle fibers. So there's one muscle fiber, and here's another, and there's another, and another. Those are all going to be wrapped in paramesium. So the paramesium wraps a bunch of muscle fibers together, right? Each of those groups of muscle fibers surrounded by paramesium is called fascicle. And we can bundle a bunch of fascicles together to get a whole muscle. So each whole muscle of your body is composed of fascicles, and each fascicle is composed of muscle cells. So it's a group within a group, right? The whole muscle is surrounded by connective tissue called epimesium. So that surrounds the entire muscle. And you can see that epimesium wraps around the muscle and then extends past the end of the muscle to attach the muscle to a bone, right? And so that basically all of that connective tissue there that's running along the length of the muscle meets at the end and becomes the tendon that attaches the muscle to the bone. I know there's a lot of terminology. Muscles have all of their own terminology, very different from other cells of the body. All right, so there's those layers again. But let's focus on a single muscle cell or muscle fiber. A muscle fiber is going to have a cell membrane, just like any cell, except here, the cell membrane has a special name. We call it a sarcolemma. So sarcolemma is the cell membrane. Inside the cell, we've got some of the organelles that you would recognize, like a nucleus, except here we've got lots of them. So a bunch of nuclei, and they tend to be pushed off to the side. But then inside the cell here, we've got these long myofibrils. So that's something we don't see in other cells. So a myofibril is a group of proteins that we find inside muscle cells, and they're what's actually going to allow the muscle cell to contract, these myofibrils full of protein. So again, myofibril. There's a bunch of mitochondria in here, again, because these are highly active cells. They need a lot of ATP, so we need a lot of mitochondria to be able to generate that. And then sarcoplasm. So sarcoplasm is the muscle term for cytoplasm. So it's just the stuff, the liquidy stuff inside the cell. Let's look at those myofibrils. So again, these kind of like long bundles of proteins. If we take a myofibril and we look at it up really, really close, we can see it's basically just a stack of proteins that have this pattern to them, which is why muscle looks striated or striped. It's the actual stripes of different proteins and the way that they're arranged on a muscle fiber. Okay, so we've got two major proteins here that are called the thick filament and the thin filament. The thick filament is this one here, right? That's also called myosin, is the name of the protein. And then the thin filament is the yellow one here, and that's called actin. So the actin and the myosin are arranged such that the myosin runs along the center of this, what we call a sarcomere, so a functional unit again here of a muscle cell. So we've got myosin lined up along the center. And then we've got actin that's attaching to the edges of this sarcomere, which are called Z discs. Right, so the Z discs are on either side. Got myosin in the middle. And what's going to happen here is the actin and myosin are going to overlap. This is what allows a muscle cell to contract, is these overlapping proteins. So as the proteins sort of come together, they overlap each other, and the muscle cell can shorten. So again, myosin is the thick protein in the middle. Actin are these thinner ones on the side that attach to the Z discs. So muscle contraction can be a really complicated thing to understand. I don't want to sugarcoat it. Excitation, contraction, coupling, which is sort of the fancy name for how we use an electrical signal to get a muscle to contract, is a complicated subject. But the basic idea of it is that we get an electrical signal from a neuron, so from your nervous system, that's going to spark a reaction in the muscle cell. So the electricity comes from the nervous system. It's able to be carried, that electrical current can carry along the surface of a muscle cell. And when that wave of electricity comes along, we're going to call that an action potential. That's going to trigger changes in the muscle cell that will result in the overlapping of those fibers, right? That's going to allow the muscle cell to contract. So where a neuron, so a nervous system cell, meets a muscle fiber, we call that a neuromuscular junction. Straightforward, where the neuron and the muscle cell meet, right? So that's where the electrical signal from the nervous system, so here's your neuron, is going to reach down and almost touch the muscle cell, right? But there's this little tiny gap between the neuron and the muscle cell called a synapse. That synapse, we have to actually send a chemical signal across the gap. So the electrical signal that's traveling down the neuron, electricity can't jump. So it reaches the end of the neuron, and then we're going to have to convert the electrical signal to a chemical one. Chemical will travel across the synapse and then trigger a new electrical signal in the muscle cell. So I know it sounds complicated. Think of it like a relay race. We've got electrical signal coming along. He reaches his stopping point, and then we have to hand over the baton to a chemical signal that will cross the synapse and then hand the baton again to an electrical signal on the other side. Right. So the chemical signal that's able to cross between the neuron and the muscle cell is called a neurotransmitter. Right? And in the case of the muscle cells, that specific neurotransmitter is one called acetylcholine. So acetylcholine is the chemical signal that crosses the synapse and goes from the neuron to the muscle cell. All right. When it does that, when it crosses that synapse, it's going to start a new action potential, a new electrical current on this muscle cell. What that electrical current is going to do to the muscle is cause it to release a bunch of calcium ions on the inside. Right? So calcium, we talked about it being really important for your skeletal system. It's also really important for your muscles, right? Your muscles can't contract unless they have adequate calcium. So we need all these calcium ions inside this cell in order to allow the muscle fibers to overlap one another. Skip this and go here. All right, so we talked about myosin and we talked about actin. So myosin is the thick filament, actin's the thin filament. What's happening when a muscle contracts is that thick filament, you can see these little, what we call cross bridges here. These are parts of the myosin that reach up and grab actin and pull actin towards the middle of the sarcomere. So they're pulling from either side to get these fibers to overlap. Right? Every time we do that, we need to use calcium and ATP. Right? So we need calcium and we need ATP energy to be able to grab on and move those proteins past one another. Okay, so there's one picture I'm looking for. There we go. So think of here the blue as being the myosin. These little blue dudes here are the cross bridges that myosin forms with actin, which is the pink, right? And you can see as we give calcium and ATP, the myosin will pull from either side to close in those Z discs. So the Z discs get closer together. As they get closer together, the whole sarcomere shortens. And if this one shortens, and then the next one shortens, and then the next one shortens, then what happens is the entire muscle fiber going all the way down the length of your muscle will get shorter. And as it gets shorter, it pulls on the bone that it's attached to, right? So it's able to create movement in that way. So, so again, we need the electrical signal, we need the ATP energy, and we need calcium to be released from inside the muscle fiber. I'm not going to get too much further into the physiology of how all that works because I don't want to overwhelm you more than I probably already have. All right, but here's the big take-home message here. We've got a neuron, it touches a muscle fiber. The electrical signal travels down the neuron, hits the synapse, which is right here. Then we have a chemical signal that crosses the synapse, that's acetylcholine. He's going to start a new action potential on the muscle fiber, so new electrical signal. When that electrical signal travels across the surface of the muscle fiber, he's going to trigger the release of calcium ions inside the cell. The calcium comes down here and creates the conditions so that the myosin can grab onto actin and pull. As long as we got ATP and calcium, that myosin can grab actin and pull. When he does that, the sarcomere shortens. If we shorten all the sarcomeres, then we have a muscle contraction. All right, so how do we get all the energy we need for that? Through a few different pathways, right? So we're going to need a lot of ATP. ATP is your cell's currency, right? We've talked about it in that context before, that it helps to power all the chemical reactions in your cell. Problem with ATP is you can't store that much of it. You don't have like unlimited ATP storage. Your muscles at any given time only have about 3 seconds worth. So it's not a lot. So we have to come up with other ways to have enough ATP ready to get continuous muscle contraction. So one of the ways that your muscles use is this creatine phosphate pathway. And creatine phosphate is a way of basically kind of keeps it, I think of it as like it puts your ATP in the refrigerator, right? It helps it last longer because you're storing it in a slightly different way so that you can use it later. You can still pull it out of the fridge and use that ATP, right? It just creates a little bit of creatinine waste when you do that. And then we can just make fresh, right? So we can make ATP fresh from glucose and oxygen the old-fashioned way. So through cellular respiration, when you breathe in oxygen, your mitochondria can use that oxygen to create ATP from the food that you eat, from glucose, right? So we can do that aerobically with oxygen, or we can do it in a pinch anaerobically without oxygen. If you're exercising really hard and you're not getting enough oxygen, you can make anaerobic ATP for a short amount of time. Right, so here's just a really brief look at the cellular respiration process, which again is just how your mitochondria are able to make ATP from the oxygen you breathe and the food that you eat. Right? This is the whole reason you eat food, and the whole reason you breathe in oxygen is so that your mitochondria can use that oxygen to break down the food that you eat into ATP energy. And then we use that ATP to power your muscles, all the chemical reactions in your body. So most of that's happening inside the mitochondria, right? Part of this process happens in the cytoplasm of the cell, but for the most part, we need mitochondria to be really efficient at this. I did mention that if your muscles are working particularly hard, They can undergo an anaerobic process, so without oxygen, called fermentation. Fermentation will help you make a little bit of ATP without having oxygen present. So if you're sprinting or doing some breathless kind of activity, it will put you in an oxygen debt, however, meaning your metabolic rate will have to go up afterwards in order to clear the wastes of fermentation, which is lactate, right? Lactic acid. So that's why your muscles burn. If you're working out really hard, they're creating lactic acid, and your metabolic rate will go up for the next 12 or so hours in order to clear that away. All right. Okay, so let's talk about different types of contractions. So most of the time when we're thinking about muscles, we're probably thinking about isotonic contractions. So isotonic contractions are ones that generate movement, right? So if I'm flexing my arm to pick up my coffee, that's an isotonic contraction. An isometric contraction is one where no movement happens, right? So if I am just sitting here holding my phone, right, I'm not moving, but I'm still using muscle in order to hold that phone, right? So that's isometric, meaning no movement. Isotonic does have movement. So these first two pictures are showing different types of isotonic. So a concentric one is one where we shorten the muscle, right? We're using muscle, shortening the muscle to get that movement. This eccentric movement is also isotonic, but we're lengthening the muscle. So the muscle is getting longer when we're doing that. And then this isometric over here, no movement at all, but we're still using muscle in order to hold that book. Motor units. So a motor unit is just a group of muscles, or I'm sorry, of muscle fibers that are all working together because they're connected to the same neuron. So your brain is controlling your muscles. It does that by a neuron reaching out and touching a whole bunch of different muscle fibers. So motor units can be really big. They can be thousands of muscle fibers attached to one single neuron, or they can be really small. We just have a handful of muscle fibers attached to one neuron. The really big ones are called low precision, right? Because they're not very precise. You've got a lot of muscle fibers attached to just one neuron, so you don't have a lot of detailed movement there. High precision are small motor units. So these are like the ones in your fingers or in your eyes or in your throat. All these very tiny muscle movements are going to be high precision motor units. All right, so here's what that looks like. So a single neuron reaching out and touching a group of muscle fibers. So that means when this single neuron fires an action potential, all the muscle fibers that are attached to it are going to contract, right? They contract as a group. Right. So this is also, just while we've got this picture up, how you can get different amounts of strength from the same muscle. Right. So with my arm, I can pick up something that's very light, or I can pick up something that's really heavy. Right. I'm using the same muscles, but what I'm doing is recruiting more motor units when I'm picking up something heavier. Right. So if I'm picking up something really light, I might just use one motor unit. If I'm picking up something really heavy, I might have to recruit all of them in order to pick up that very heavy weight. Here's an example of a really precise motor unit, like the ones that control the extraocular muscles around your eye, right? So the eyeball has these little tiny muscles attached to it that help you move your eyes side to side, up and down, and diagonally. Those are some of the most precise motor units in your body because each neuron is only attached to just a very small amount of fibers, 1 to 4 muscle fibers per neuron. Okay, so now we get into looking at the muscles themselves. Now, you don't have to memorize every muscle in the body because there are literally hundreds, 400 to 600, depending on who's counting. We should know the basics of how they work though. So this idea of origins and insertions. So an origin is where a muscle begins. It's usually a point that does not have movement. And the insertion is where a muscle ends. And that part usually does generate movement, right? So if I'm looking at your biceps brachii here, so biceps brachii, that's this one, right? Its origin is up at the shoulder, right? Should put origin there. The insertion is down here at the elbow. The insertion is where we're going to generate the movement, right? So when I flex my biceps, the movement it generates is of the forearm, right? It pulls the forearm close. So the insertion is where the movement happens. So you can see origins and insertions here. And again, you don't need to know every origin and every insertion for every muscle. Just know that an origin is kind of our starting point, and an insertion is where that muscle is pulling, right? Where it's attached to pull and create motion. Muscles also tend to work as groups, right? So for the most part, they're not solo artists. They kind of work together to get certain motions done. So even when I'm flexing my elbow here to get motion of that joint, biceps brachii is doing most of the work. And so we would call him the prime mover or the agonist. But he's got helpers. And the helpers are going to be called, here we are, synergists. Right, so synergists are the ones that help the prime mover do the job. So synergistically with biceps brachii is a deeper muscle called brachialis, right? And they work together. The muscle that does the opposite action is going to be the antagonist. So whereas biceps brachii over here flexes the elbow, triceps brachii is going to extend the elbow. So when I want to extend that, I need the triceps muscles to do that extension. So they work opposite one another. All right, so we're going to go through and kind of list some of the important muscles that we should be at least a little bit familiar with. Notice as we're going through them that a lot of them are named for their location, or that they're named because of their job, their function, or their size, right? So this one here, occipitofrontalis, is called that because he inserts on the frontal bone and he originates on the occipital bone way in the back. So it's a huge sheet of muscle that goes all the way from the front to the back. Orbicularis oris, this is the one that goes around the mouth. So oris, think oral. Orbicularis, because he's around, like an orbit, goes all the way around the mouth. All right, buccinator is a deep muscle of the cheek here. So that's the muscle that allows you to sort of like pull your cheeks in and make like a fishy face where you're pulling in. Zygomaticus major is this guy who inserts on the lips and goes to the zygomatic arch. That's the one responsible for smiling. So it pulls the corners of the lips upward. All right. The eyelid, the upper lid, is controlled by one called levator palpebrae superioris, which sounds complicated, but palpebrae is just the scientific name for your eyelid. Levator means to elevate or bring up, and superioris means the top one. So elevate the top eyelid is levator palpebrae superioris. Orbicularis oculi, so this is another orbit going around. Oculi, because we're referring to the eye here. So it goes all the way around the eye, helps you close the eye. And then platysma, this is down here. Platysma helps lower the jaw or open the mouth. So pulls the mandible down. We're looking at the side. Here's some muscles associated with chewing. So masseter here, that helps to close the jaw. And also temporalis helps to close the jaw. So temporalis sits on top of the temporal bone up here, but inserts all the way down here on the jaw. right? And then the extraocular muscles, or the muscles outside the eyeball, and they're just going to help move the eye side to side, up and down. There are 6 of them. So we've got the rectus muscles. Any rectus means straight, right? So these are straight muscles attaching to the eyeball. And then we've got 2 obliques, so a superior and inferior oblique, meaning they come in at an angle. So all 4 rectus muscles: superior, inferior, medial, and lateral rectus, and then superior and inferior oblique, which help the eyeball move diagonally. Right, looking at the muscles of the tongue, so these are all still skeletal muscles here. So anything glossus, anything glossus, that's always referring to the tongue. So keep that in your back pocket. So these are going to help move the tongue downward, forward, upward, backward. It's all going to help with chewing and talking. All right, muscles of the neck. Primary muscles of the anterior neck here are going to be sternocleidomastoids, right? And so these are the ones that if you kind of turn your head, you can sort of see them. They're going from the temporal bone behind your ear all the way down past the clavicle to the sternum, right? Which is why they're called sternocleido for clavicle. Mastoid, which is the process of the temporal bone that they're attached to. You've got one on either side. If you flex them both at the same time, the head goes down. If you flex just one, the head will turn in that direction. If you flex it in the other, head will turn the other way. So those are the prime movers for those neck movements. The scalenes are synergists. So these are little muscles behind the sternocleidomastoid. Right. If we look at the back of the neck, prime muscle there is the trapezius. You can see it's this huge sheet of muscle that attaches to the spinous processes of all these vertebrae, and then also wings out to the spine of the scapula. So covers a lot of area here. And these are going to be antagonists to sternocleidomastoid. So when you flex trapezius bilaterally on both sides, the head goes back. So points the head upward. Down in the back here, we've got latissimus dorsi. So latissimus dorsi, he attaches to the spinous processes of your vertebrae, but then also reaches out to grab the arm here, and he's going to help with shoulder movement. All right, and then the abdominal wall, right? So you have 4 layers of abdominal muscles here that protect the abdominal organs and also allow for flexion of the spine. So the most superficial layer is going to be the rectus abdominis. So rectus abdominis is this one here. That's the one you can see. It's got these partitions to it, so that you can, if you've got all those flexed out, you can see a 6 or 8 pack in the front. Then we've got external oblique that's coming in from the side downward. We've got internal oblique, which you can't see super well in this picture, but it's going the opposite direction, so it would go this direction. And then we've got transverse abdominis, which again, a little bit of right here, but that's going to go in the transverse or horizontal plane to help compress the abdomen. So all of these abdominal muscles are going to be helpful in flexing the spine, but also in anytime you need to compress the abdomen. So that could be for taking a big breath out, so pushing air out. It could be for defecation, childbirth, urination, anytime you need to compress that abdomen. All right, another important one here is the diaphragm. So diaphragm is the muscle that separates the thoracic cavity from the abdominal cavity below it, right? So this is the prime mover for breathing, right? It helps to expand the chest so that you can take a breath in. Synergists for breathing are going to be your external intercostals. So they're going to help you take a breath in. Intercostal means between the ribs. So these are little muscles that attach the ribs together. And then internal intercostals are deep to those. Those are going to help with exhaling. So if you have to take a forceful exhale, it helps compress the rib cage. All right. Shoulder muscles. So we've got the deltoid. That's the big one off to the side there. That's going to help abduct the arm or bring it away. We've also got pectoralis major. So those are your pec muscles. That's going to help adduct the arm or bring it back to the midline, and also medially rotate, so bring the shoulder forward. Okay. And then your pectoral girdle muscle. So in addition to that deltoid and the pectoralis, we've also got these, we look at the back, we've got these rhomboids here. So rhomboid minor and rhomboid major. Those are attaching the scapula to the spine. So basically help bring your shoulder blades backwards. And then your rotator cuff muscles. So these are all important in rotating the shoulder. So supraspinatus and infraspinatus, those are above supra and below infra, the spine, spinatus of the scapula. Then we've got subscapularis, which is underneath the scapula, and teres minor, which is this little guy down here. So all of those are going to help with rotation of the arm. All right, and then movements of the forearm. So forearm movements are mostly generated in the arm. So biceps brachii helps to flex the forearm. Triceps brachii extends it, and brachialis is a synergist with biceps brachii. If we look at the muscles of the forearm, then we've got the brachioradialis. So he helps to do rotation, so moves that radius bone around, and he also helps a little bit with elbow flexion. All right. Muscles of the anterior compartment of the forearm, so anterior side of the forearm. On the anterior side, we're mostly dealing with flexion of the wrist. So the muscles of the forearm are what are pulling on the wrist bones down here. So they help the wrist flex. So we've got these flexor muscles, flexor carpi. So flex and close the angle of carpi, the wrist, radialis on the radial side. So flexing the wrist from the radius, flexor carpi ulnaris flexes it from the pinky side, and then palmaris longus is right in the middle, goes all the way down to the fingers. Okay. On the posterior side of the forearm, we have extensors, right? So those are going to pull from the posterior side and extend the wrist or pull it backwards. Right? So again, extensor carpes, radialis and ulnaris are going to extend that, and then extensor digitorum goes all the way to the fingers to help extend the fingers. All right. Intrinsic muscles of the hand. This means intrinsic, meaning they're within the hand and they move the hand, right? We've got muscles that can move the hand from the arm, but we've also got little ones up in the hand that move the hand. You don't need to know these in detail. I will mention the levator ani though. So this is a group of muscles that acts as your pelvic floor. Right? So basically it holds the pelvic organs in place so they don't fall through the pelvis. All right, turning around and looking at the posterior, we see the gluteus groups. So we've got gluteus maximus, that's the largest muscle of the body. That's going to help extend the hip or straighten the leg. We've also got gluteus medius. He's going to help with abduction and medial rotation of the hip. And then gluteus minimus is deep to this. You can't see him, but he's also going to help with that abduction. If you look at the anterior side here, we can see some of the hip flexors. So like iliopsoas is going to help flex the hip or bend the thigh. And then we've got this guy along the side, tensor fascia latae. He's going to help abduct the leg, so pull it out to the side. And then our quads. So quads are the group of 4 muscles on the anterior compartment of the thigh. Those are going to assist in flexing the hip, but also extending the knee is the prime job there. Right? So they work through this giant tendon, which goes through the patella all the way to the tibial tuberosity. All right. If we turn the leg around and look at it from the back, we see the hamstrings. So hamstrings is a group of 3 muscles here that together are going to help flex the knee. So they pull the leg up and backwards, so flexing the knee joint and also helping extend the hip. And then on the medial compartment of the thigh, we've got adductors. So adductors help adduct the thigh, bring it back to the midline. All right, and then down into the leg, we've got tibialis anterior. That's your shin muscle. So when you feel shin splints, that's that guy. So he's going to help dorsiflect the foot and invert it. So point those soles of the foot inward. And then we've got these extensors that are on the fibula. So extensors and peroneus muscles, they're going to go all the way down in the foot and help kind of pull the feet up or extend the toes. Right, and on the back of the calf, the big calf muscle there that you can see, that's your gastrocnemius. Gastrocnemius has a synergist called the soleus that is right deep to him. And together, the 2 of those muscles are going to form one of the biggest tendons in your body, which is your Achilles tendon. So that goes from the gastrocnemius all the way down to the calcaneus bone of the foot. Oh, and there we have it. So those are all your, well, those are the major muscles that you should be sort of familiar with. So any questions about muscles or bones?
I just have one question, and it's just like, for my own knowledge,
Yeah.
even if we don't have to have it for the class. Potassium has a play in like the muscle contraction, yeah?
It does, right? Particularly because of the way that we depolarize the membranes of the
Mhm.
muscles and the nerve cells. And we'll actually be talking a lot more about the role of potassium next week when we get into the nervous system. But yes, it does play a role.
Okay. Yeah, no, I thought so. I just wanted to be sure because I'd made a note of it and then I was like, well, should I take it away or because we never talked about it.
No, you're right. It's in there. It's in there. I just
Okay.
didn't get too far into it today.
Yeah. Okay. It was the muscles are easier than the bones, especially in the face and the head. A lot of them are the same, like, they're familiar with the bone name. So
Right.
that'll be helpful.
Exactly. Right. So there's a lot of overlap between those 2 systems.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
You too. Have a good week, also.
Okay. Bye-bye.